the senior people matter because they've been around it long enough to where they understand how to deal with type A personalities and know how to deal with them so they get to the end result, the best end result, not the here's what the customer wanted result, or here's what the agency wanted result. Here's what we think is best for the market.
This is You Should Talk To, a podcast for busy marketing leaders who are looking for support and tips on getting shit done. In each episode, Daniel Weiner interviews marketing leaders and discusses their experience, successes, and failures around hiring agencies. If you're interested in finding and choosing the right agency partner, then let's jump in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the You Should Talk To podcast. I am Daniel Weiner. This podcast is currently brought to you by myself at You Should Talk To. Until a sponsor ponies up, You Should Talk To pairs brands and marketers for free with vetted agencies and or freelancers for marketing and tech needs. Kyle's already laughing at me. We're off to a good spot. Why do I do this? Because finding agencies, great ones, is a giant, enormous pain in the ass and takes a shitload of time. I am joined today by Kyle Lacy, who is CMO at Jellyfish. Kyle, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Much appreciated. I was laughing because it's a great intro for the sponsors. So those of you listening that can pony it up, you should.
I'm waiting on Apple. We were just talking about how much we both love Apple. So whenever they want to give me whatever they would like, I'll just take some new AirPods, truthfully, and they can have whatever they want. So
I would take anything from them. You know, we talked about that.
My first question, what the hell is Jellyfish? Tell us.
So, it's pretty simple. It's Jellyfish is an engineering management platform for engineering leaders to better manage their teams, both from an allocations perspective as well as team health, anything across the board when it comes to how do you make sure that your engineering team's doing their best work. And of course, we can get way more tactical and technical, but we're not going to do that on this call. But you can check out jellyfish.co for the website.
Any story behind the name?
I think there is basically, from what I can tell, because I've been here at the time of this recording, this is like my 90-day birthday at Jellyfish. There were a ton of names that were thrown around, and Jellyfish is a unique enough name for a software company that it stands out. And it's also the essence of the jellyfish as technically, I guess you would say it's an animal, right?
Yeah, I think so.
We're
marketers. I'm not a biologist.
Right. It was more that, there's nuances in like how a jellyfish has a bloom of other jellyfish and the grouping and connection to the ocean and surfing and the waves and that type of stuff. But really it's kind of just a different name to stand out in the market.
I like it. Let's dive into the meat of it. What is an unpopular opinion or a hot take of sorts that you have in the marketing world?
An unpopular opinion that I have in the marketing world. I would say, unpopular, depending on who you're talking to, but I've had the most flack that I get from peers or people on their soapbox is whether or not you should spend a ton of time and energy trying to measure brand. I don't think you should, but the caveat is that you've got to drive revenue first. And so when I get the fanatics, the measurement fanatics that think you should measure everything and can measure everything, which is true. You can build attribution models to measure absolutely everything that you possibly could want to do. But there's sometimes where experiences like a great direct mail or a great event or a podcast, right? It just doesn't need to be measured. And I've found that creatives are more creative when it's the idea that's more important than the actual revenue generated. And it's kind of like, it's kind of like this idea of a rising tide lifts all ships. And if you're doing it correctly and you're celebrating the customer and the prospect and you're giving them a great experience, the revenue is going to come. So that's where I get most of the flack, because revenue marketers, demand gen marketers, sometimes it's hard to take in that you don't need to measure it necessarily.
I agree. You miss all the cool stuff if you don't, or if you attempt to measure everything. I also somewhat take the opinion, do you think you can get, like you said, you can measure everything. Do you think you truly can get like 100% attribution?
Yeah. Yeah, you can. It's going to take too much time and energy and it's not actionable.
That's
Right.
fair.
So, if you think about marketing spend as it relates to this podcast, 70% of my budget usually goes to demand gen, revenue pipeline activities, and 30% goes to experiences. And that's kind of a broad statement, but the
Sure.
70% is the most important. That has to be efficient. It has to drive pipeline. It has to support deal velocity for the sales team, no matter what the go-to-market model is. And then the other 30% can be used to surprise and delight people because
Sure.
ultimately, that's our job as marketers.
No, it makes total sense. It's funny you bring up the rising tide raises all ships. I joke that rising tide raises all ships. I just want a bigger, better boat for me and my friends and family. So,
Yeah.
but I still want everybody else to win. I just kind of want to get my yacht there first. But
Yeah,
neither,
absolutely.
neither
Well,
here nor
and that's the brand side of it. You need a big yacht.
I'm with you. You've worked in SaaS and tech, I believe, your entire career, or at least most of it. Tell us a little bit about that journey, and truthfully, from the beginning to now, what's the biggest change you've seen?
Yeah, the first 5 years out of college, I was a designer and I worked for a small agency called Round Peg in Indianapolis. And she actually let me start an agency in her office. And so I ran a design agency. We did web, WordPress, logos. I designed brochures in Photoshop, which is stupid and I'll never do again, but this was a long time ago. And I wasn't traditionally trained as a designer. I kind of taught
Sure.
myself. When we ran that firm into the ground, because we were young and had no idea what we were doing, I was lucky enough to join my first software company, which was ExactTarget, which was based in Indy. And, the year I joined, they probably hired 500 people. And it was already a rocket ship. I was lucky to be able to speak all over the world at conferences, meet a bunch of marketers, basically get a view of what it means to scale something to an IPO. We IPO'd, we were bought by Salesforce. I spent a year at Salesforce and realized it was too big. So through that process, I worked at a VC firm after that called OpenView. And then, Lessonly was my first real marketing leadership role as a VP of marketing on the exec team. We grew that 5.5 years, sold it to Seismic. I was on the Seismic exec team for a year, much different, much more like an ExactTarget where hundreds of millions of revenue, over 1,200 employees. Also realized that was too big, and now I'm at Jellyfish. So the biggest change that I've seen, probably the most impactful change for software, has been what OpenView kind of led with, which is product-led growth. This idea that, the Datadogs of the world, the Mondays.coms, the Expensifys, the Calendlys, that you can build an experience where the product is used before they buy. And I'm simplifying product led, but
Sure.
that's the biggest change that I've seen in both software as well as marketing, because it's a very different type of approach. I mean, we're getting there with like tools that help you do product tours and stuff like that are, for somebody like Jellyfish, that's more sales led. But yeah, that's been the biggest change. Most of my career's been in sales led, but that's the try before you buy has changed pretty dramatically over the past decade.
Yeah, it sounds like we've shifted more towards a little bit more beneficial for the buyer as well with that model.
Yeah, which makes sense, right? Intuitively, with the advent of the internet, right? And then all of these peer networking groups, sites like G2, you're more likely to really know what you want to buy before you ever get to the first meeting, or a site like Monday.com, you're just going to go use it.
Sure.
And the product has to sell itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Tech in general, I would say, is having a rough time economy-wise and layoffs, and we see a lot of depressing news lately. In general, what's your advice to other CMOs out there at companies like yours or beyond, even on the B2C side, anybody? How do you get through this, and what's kind of the what are you leading with, with your team, internally, externally, all that sort of stuff?
Well, the first order of business is efficiency, especially the growth stage companies. And I'll repeat back what I've heard multiple times from investors. Nobody is going to look back 2 years, 3 years from now and fault you for not growing faster than you think you could have. they are going to fault you if you didn't grow efficiently. It's not so this idea that 21, 22 are all about super growth, fast growth, raise funds, grow, especially in high growth software, which I've lived in. Now it's about still growing, but you want to be efficient while doing it, which, I think it's a good pivot in general. I think it needs to happen. And for CMOs, it's about, again, drive efficient revenue. If you drive efficient revenue, both inbound and supporting outbound or your product, then, you're going to have a good story to tell. If you don't do it efficiently, it's going to be very, very difficult in the near future.
Sure. And just from an overall leadership standpoint, downstream, what's your note to CMOs of how to manage, expectations of scared, worried teams and stuff like that? Hard to see some of the headlines. What's your note to them there?
Yeah, I think that it's the same messaging that I would give anyway. We have a product that is needed. There's a reason why we have product market fit. We need to execute and be proactive and remember and have empathy with the market. And I've said that for the past 6 years to my team. So it's not any different. It's just, let's make sure that we're looking at the right metrics so we understand the leading and lagging indicators of where the market's going for your specific segment. And I haven't really adjusted my messaging outside of that because it's all about execution.
No, that's totally fair. We'll dive into some agency stuff now. What's
Yeah.
your overall opinion on agencies? And I'd say you have a unique perspective as being marketing leader now, is probably getting hit up by agencies and coming from agency side many years ago. What's your overall opinion?
It's very, very difficult to find a great agency. And I'm talking across the board: design, web, paid, PR, whatever, communications.
I tend to agree, and I do that for a living.
Yes, I know. It's very difficult to find. And usually you can't find a one fits all needs, right? Like I haven't had great experiences where I've hired an agency and they're doing multiple things. It's usually you're finding somebody that is an expert in one thing, and that is the one thing that they are doing, right? Whether that's SEO, content, website, branding. There are cases where agencies, in a macro level, are really good when it comes to trying to scale something.
Sure.
A lot of early stage companies, it makes sense that you would outsource that type of stuff. But in my experience, you have to be very upfront with agencies on what the success metrics are that you're going to measure them against and look at them on a bi-weekly basis.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that even from my side, like there's something like 90,000 agencies in the US alone, or at least companies that consider themselves agencies. And I find the biggest thing that I guess I never realized when I started doing this, I'm curious what your opinion is, the more VPs and CMOs I talk to, it's not that they're necessarily talking to bad agencies. They're talking to the wrong agency for their situation. So, they have an ask and they have a budget and they'll talk to typically 3 or 4 agencies, and all 3 or 4 may be like wrong for their particular situation, and they're just not willing to explore more. And even sometimes when I'm helping, I'm like, if you're not super, super pumped to sign that contract, even if it could be the worst decision you ever make, you should be really excited on the front end of the promise of signing that thing. And I think people talk to too few outside vendors often. Do you think that's the case, or?
Well, I think I told you this when we first met, when I was introduced to you. The hardest part is having all the upfront conversations with all these different agencies that all do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It's just, they all, from my perspective, if I go to one website, go to another website, I ask my peers, they give a bunch of feedback. It's just really, really hard to vet initially. And, I think that the agencies that I have worked with, I haven't signed a contract where I'm like, blah. But the same thing applies to like candidates that you're hiring for. If you're kind of like on the fence, then it's not worth it. Right. So Which is why what you do is so valuable, because nobody else has the time to be like, here's 20 agencies. How many should we talk to? Let's talk to 5. I have no idea why. I've got 5 because
Sure.
Jane told me she worked with this agency and she loved
Yeah.
it, but Jane is a completely different company, right?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And thank you for the plug. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, easy. That's easy.
Thank you. This is a fun one. Most marketers with your title I speak to, like, this is like a trigger warning, I feel like I should say, are getting hit up like legitimately sometimes like hundreds of times per week from some that I've talked to, typically at bigger consumer facing brands. But I'm curious, is that the same for you between Slack, email,
Yep.
LinkedIn, all the things by vendors and agencies?
Yep.
And is there anything when you're not in buying mode, or even if you are in buying mode, that an agency or vendor, I'll throw in, can say to make you take a call when you're not in that mode or stand out or anything? The vast majority say no, truthfully, and we love transparency here, so that's a totally fair answer.
I'm a little bit different. I am always, I don't know if this is the right thing to say, honestly, but I'm never not in a buying mode.
That's fair.
However, the two things that I see very, very, very rarely, it's very rare, is a reference to something I have said, or a quote from this podcast, or a post that I've done about brand or whatever being referenced in the outreach. And the second part is something actionable.
Boy, are you in luck, because after all of these podcasts, I've heard from your, I think this is episode 22. I have heard from literally virtually everybody. Like, oh my God, after we record, every LinkedIn message has like, we saw you on the You Should Talk To podcast. So you can thank me when that happens.
I want to be very clear. It's not we saw you. You need to reference something,
okay,
and have some type of connection. And then, but that's only the first part. Most people can do that. Giving me something actionable, like as an example, hey, noticed your website load rate is X. That's an F on pingdom.com. Here are 5 or 6 things that I think you should do free of charge to work to get faster load times, whatever. That's a terrible example, but those are the people that I will read and consider talking to. The next step I do is I either ask my peer group about it, or I go to the website and vet, a gut check on whether I actually believe that you can do what you say you're going to do.
Okay. We'll have to do a follow-up check-in.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to.
A month after this airs, we'll see.
Yeah, the actionable part is what people usually don't do, right? And that's, if you're giving me something up front that's valuable, I'm more than likely at least responding.
That's fair. What do you want to see from agencies and vendors when you are evaluating them? So you've made it past the initial stage, or say there's 5 that you're talking to. How can an agency or vendor stand out? What's important to you?
Something I think I would have to pay for. If I read it, here's a great example. I won't mention the vendor or anything, but one of the harder things to do for a software marketing team is win-loss reviews. Right? Like calling a closed loss prospect and talking to them and asking them why they decided to do X, Y, or Z.
Sure.
I had a vendor reach out to me and send me a call that they did with a deal that we won without asking me to do it. Nothing. The whole transcript, the top 5 takeaways, and that was the outreach email. That's quality, because it gives me an example of what they do. It also means that they care about my time, because they're sending me something that's actionable, right? So I've seen situations with design firms where they will send a mock-up of something without me asking, or SEO organic, they will send a keyword analysis to me without me asking. Those vendors are more likely going to get my attention because they did something outside of send an email.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that. I don't think you're wrong. I think my hypothesis of this entire thing, like, I have opinions on what's important to me and stuff like that. What I find, if you boil it all down based on all of these conversations I have, it's know your audience, because I know I've talked, like, even on these podcasts, other CMOs, they don't want to see certain things like that. And it's a big gamble. I come from agency, so it's a gamble to do the mock-up because if you hate it, they've lost you
It is on the
potentially.
design side. It is for sure.
Yeah, even the SEO stuff, like if you miss or like misunderstood. So I have this constant chat with agencies of when it's worth doing stuff like that. So it's interesting to hear from different people of what they want. And at the end of the day, it is like pretty split of that's truthfully my unpopular opinion, which I'm curious your take on. So my quote unquote unpopular opinion is the work doesn't matter. And what I mean by that is, of course, the work matters, but to get to do the work, you have to have a wonderful process and you have to win first to earn trust and all of this stuff.
Sure.
And I think a lot of agencies
Yeah, that's fair.
over index for like, we're the best at X. And I'm like, no one gives a shit about that first.
Yeah,
Like,
I think I would agree specifically for design web. I think more the more tactical type agency would have a higher success rate with like here's how I think you should do paid differently, or here's a competitive paid ad and I think you should rewrite it in this way. The design side, fully agree with you. Like if you send me design and it's not the direction that I would go, then you've lost before you could ever pitch. So the other huge driver for me is also my peers,
yeah,
and understanding the network and the community. That's how we were introduced, right? Like that's a massive win for me if I have a peer that I respect referring somebody.
yeah.
And I don't, you might know this better than I, but I don't think agencies have a great system to manage that. I worked with a great agency at Seismic and they had a great system for that. They had me on the hook for I did 3 reference calls for them, but they had a process for it. That was the first time in my career that I'd ever experienced that.
Yeah, I see 2 sides of the community coin, which is interesting. So Kathleen Booth, who's SVP of marketing at Pavilion, who I know
Yep.
you're in as well. I had her on the podcast and she had a quote that's always stuck with me that community is the new Google, where, no one's really like starting their search at Google. They're starting with community and then going to Google.
Yeah.
That part's awesome. You have to like have the community. What I've seen though is an uprise lately in communities of people saying, "Hey, does anybody know anything about X agency?"
Yeah.
And it's truthfully, I feel bad for something. Like there'll be agencies I know. I haven't really seen it with any that I've worked with because I would probably chime in where somebody will be like, "Oh, like they're the worst. Don't work with them," and they don't really like provide context, which I think is like a dangerous.
I agree.
Piece of the community thing, which is why I think it's funny. Like even in communities or on LinkedIn, I see, which is why I like to think I provide value. People will say, "Hey, does anybody have a recommendation for X?" And no one asks a single question. They just list agents. Oh, yeah, work with these guys. And I'm like, you didn't ask anything. You don't know it. Like, what do you mean? So it's hard. I think the community is mostly good, but it does have some like, you get blacklisted truthfully without context from some of these things as an agency.
Yeah. And there are CMOs, marketing leaders, CEOs that will take that face value. It's the easiest thing and Kathleen's right. The easiest thing for me is that I build a list.
Yeah.
And then I'll go vet. Right. And that's why we were initially introduced, but the vetting process is what's the most difficult.
Yeah. You alluded to it earlier too, of specialized agencies. I've seen a big shift, especially since COVID, a little before, of bigger brands moving towards smaller independent agencies, specialized and call it 1 to 2 things. Is that typically your preference and you've seen the same?
Yep, it is. I don't know, man. I can't give you one example of an agency I've worked with that knocked it out of the park by doing multiple things. I mean, that's reality. Even some of the amazing firms I've worked with, they were maybe great at content and brand, and then we got to the web portion and they failed miserably.
Yeah, it's hard to do multiple things really well.
It is, and that's why I think that a full service agency, I'm less likely. I'll still pick only one service that they offer.
Yeah,
like I will have them do the web design and the organic and the paid because I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's realistic on the customer side to expect that. And I don't think it's realistic for an agency to do it full scale.
Yeah. I work with many full service agencies in general. I'm recommending them for 1 to 2 things.
Yeah.
Even when they are full service. They can sell what they want when they get on the phone, of course, and
Sure.
can win stuff. Sure. But yeah, I'm generally recommending for 3 at the most, I'd say.
Yep.
In particular, in the past, can you think of a really great agency experience you've had? And in particular, what made it great? This kind of goes into, I'm curious how much weight is on the actual work versus like the process.
Yeah. I mean, the agency I've worked with had the best experience. It was both. It was the process, the management of what made it great initially was the management of all of the type A personalities that had to give feedback. They were brilliant at making sure that the exec team all felt heard, making sure that there was enough time and energy spent in vetting the ideas that in the background they were probably thinking that's the worst thing that you could possibly do, but they at least gave it face time so that the exec that brought it up felt like he or she was listened to. And then, so they had one person that ran it really, really well. And that person would bring in experts like for a video script for the website,
Sure.
for the designer would come in and talk about typeface and color palette. And so the process was always managed by a senior person. I think that's what works for this agency. Sometimes you're handed off to an account manager and you feel like they're just managing your calendar.
You get the B team after you get the A team.
Yeah. And we had the A team the whole time. Now, and when so towards the end of the process, when we started getting into web and it started not working, we gave them that feedback and they took it and they made the right decisions to say, hey, like, we understand, we wish you luck in the future, and we parted ways, and I'll refer them for any type of brand work because they were great at it. So
Sure.
it was mostly how they managed the opinions in the room, and we still got to what I thought was the right end result.
That's great. Can you think of, on the flip side, a really negative agency experience you've had without throwing anybody under the bus, and what made it negative? We love a spicy story here, so
Yeah.
lay it on me.
I've never had like a really negative. There's
When
been
were
an
you,
agency.
when were you most pissed off? Is that a better way?
Yeah, no, yeah. So there's been an agency we used in the past, and we collectively over the past 4 companies I've been at, I'm not going to pick a specific one, that the designer on the project, junior designer, would not take any feedback we were giving. Basically, taking the mindset into meetings of, your ideas are stupid. I'm the designer. This is what is right.
Sheesh.
And at towards the end of it, meaning us cutting the project, they had to remove him from the meetings because and this was earlier in my career as well. So it wasn't like I was managing the room appropriately as a junior leader. Any feedback that we gave, they would bring back iterations that didn't include any of it. And it was the air of the designer, the way that they approached it was very opinionated and
Arrogant a little.
arrogant. Yeah. So that's probably the worst experience. But ultimately, my feedback to the leadership was, I should have removed him in the first meeting. Like, there's no way that that's going to work out for you anywhere, unless it's like a top tier, you're paying $1 million for a rebrand and it's like the designer at a top tier firm. And even then it's probably not worth it.
Yeah. And that's a good point too, that I don't hear a lot. Like, it's, I guess selfless is the word.
Yeah.
Self-aware maybe, of when you're like, I talked to plenty of VPs who have just gotten into a new role. And I guess one of the biggest things I didn't realize before doing this, I was like, oh, every VP and every CMO has hired 1 million agencies in their career. And it's just not the case, truthfully. Sometimes they've inherited it,
Yeah.
and they're, so now that you are more senior in your career, to that person who just got into their new VP role or new CMO, truthfully, and is going through it first, what's the note for how to get the best out of your agencies, whether you're giving them or hiring a new one? Like, what do you do? Is it, what's most important? How do you get, to that positive experience?
I mean, make sure the one thing I didn't do with that agency was I didn't spend enough time vetting the personnel that was going to work on the account. Where I get,
process.
where I have issues is when an agency comes in and expects to understand the persona, use case, pain points within like 2 weeks of signing on. And that's their feedback, is that, hey, a VP of engineering would like this when we've got a team that's worked with that persona for 5 years. So I would caution agencies in general to come in as, we can become an expert to who you sell to within like a month of us signing a contract, because it's not realistic. I don't care what type of onboarding process you have. So that's why understanding the personnel that will be on the call, the seniority of that personnel, of those personnel. The best agencies I've ever worked with had senior people on the account the entire time. So for me, if I go back to Kyle, when I was dealing with that other agency, I would have vetted the personnel on the account much earlier and said, hey, I don't want the account manager running this process that's been at the agency for a year. Like, I want a senior partner because we're paying X amount of money.
That may be the answer to the next question, but I'm curious if you have another. What do you think agencies oftentimes or all of the time get wrong? Like, what's something you wish more agencies, quote unquote, got or understood about the perils and the challenges of a CMO?
Well, I think that's it. I don't think a lot of agencies spend enough time understanding all the other shit that we're dealing with. Right. And the best people I've worked
You mean
with,
they're not top priority every morning you wake up to make sure your agency partners are taken care of?
well, no, it's just, it's understanding the persona, much like we have to understand VPs of engineering. Like, what am I dealing with outside of this project that is going to affect my ability to be the best customer for that agency? And it's very much a product marketing spin for the agency, as much as it is us having a product marketing team for a software company. And that's where the senior people matter, because they've been around it long enough to where they understand how to deal with type A personalities and know how to deal with them so they get to the end result, the best end result, not that here's what the customer wanted result, or here's what the agency wanted result. Here's what we think is best for the market.
Yeah, no, I agree. I got some shit on LinkedIn recently because I posted that I didn't think results were what made an agency good or bad. It was the people and the process and stuff.
You know
and
what?
that's subjective.
It's very subjective, and I agree with you. I think
well, that's one. I'm back.
Post
that right after this.
I do think it depends on the agency. Like, if you're talking,
well, you'll get fired if the results suck eventually. I just don't think that makes you bad.
No, but yes, absolutely. I agree with you completely. I think it's mostly just, how do you manage the customer in a way that it feels like your feedback is being taken appropriately? And if you don't agree with it, doing it in a nonviolent way that has empathy, so that it's not just that arrogant designer I dealt with early in my career.
Yeah. Do you think a negative agency situation can be salvaged, or once it's reached that point of you're pissed off, it's kind of the seed of doubt has been sowed?
Me personally, I'm pretty laid back in general. So if there's if you come to me without a solution, then yeah, you've lost it. You get one chance. You get one, like 2 strikes. I'm just not.
I think I joked you get 1.5 chances, one big one and one small one.
Yeah, definitely. I'll give an agency a second chance, especially if it's like an account manager that wasn't dealing with it appropriately, or a designer, and they put somebody else on the account, or they put the senior person switched out. Like, I'll give it another chance, but not 2.
Yeah. What are you most bullish on in the marketing space? I normally ask, what do you think of like NFTs and metaverse, but I think maybe we're past that. Though events are back. What are you most excited about? I don't know, man. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
I played around with it. I can't get back in these days.
Chat GPT designing websites from the ground up without any human involvement.
Jeez, that'll be the next frontier. I won't even have to do anything. I'll be out of a job.
Yeah. No, what's most exciting for me is, I think that this market and a lot of the efficiencies that you have to find as a marketer and a marketing team will get teams back down to the basics that are the most important, which is understanding the customer, giving them the best experience possible. And those companies will win. And I'm excited that it's hard. The market is hard. But I believe that we will be at a better place coming out of it, because we've got to get down to the basics.
I can't remember who I saw writing about it. Maybe it was you, actually. The answer to virtually every problem you have or any question you have is go talk to your customers some more. And like so many people, we get so deeply invested in tactics and the budgets and all that sort of stuff, and we forget that there's like a bunch of people using the thing that you can go talk to for free usually. So
And Gong is a great example of a tool that marketers underutilize, because you've got hours and hours and hours of prospect and customer calls that you're not listening to. I mean, that's
what a smart product Gong is.
It is. It is. Any of those in that space. It's just a brilliant tool that I think sales uses a lot, but marketers should be using more often.
You hear that, Gong? Pay up. Big fan of your work. My final real question for you, and then we'll do a couple fun ones before we wrap up. What keeps you up at night from a marketing or business standpoint?
What keeps me up at night?
The best answer I've received so far is from the only person I have interviewed, the head of brand for SEMrush, who lives in Barcelona, who said, "Truthfully, I sleep pretty well." And
I'm sure.
I realize we should all move to Europe.
I'm sure they do. Very, very European of them. What keeps me up at night? It's a combination of my team, so making sure that they are taken care of and not necessarily happy, but fulfilled in what they do. And number two is revenue. I mean, if that's ultimately my team being fulfilled and executing appropriately, and us driving revenue that's needed to grow companies, because ultimately the big win for me as a leader is when you can have a financial outcome that it benefits more than just the company. It benefits the community, it benefits families. Yeah. And that's what keeps me up at night, because that's ultimately why I'm in high growth software.
I hope you get some sleep.
I sleep pretty good. I guarantee you I
That's
don't
good.
sleep as well as your guest from Madrid, but I'm in bed by 8:30. I get up at 4. It's pretty easy.
Do you 8:30 and 4? What do you do? Are you work out in the morning for that, or are you just like getting up?
If I didn't work out in the morning, I would never work out. So I've got to get it done.
I've tried. I'm like a 5 o'clock person.
5's good. 4 is a little early, and I'm saying that with all humility, because it's the days get long when you wake up that way. You're eating lunch at like 10 a.m.
I was gonna say, yeah.
What was your very, very, very first job?
I worked at a place called the Gaither Family Resource Center in Alexandria, Indiana. I don't know if anybody listening knows Bill and Gloria Gaither, who are gospel singers. One of the more successful gospel singers of all time. They're based in Indiana. And it was, they had something called the Gaither Homecoming series that were VHS tapes of them in a room with all their friends singing hymns. And they had hundreds of these, like years and years and years and years and years of these videos. And I worked in the store and sold those videos, and we would have people come in and drop $1,000 on. Ultimately, you would argue it's the same thing over and over and over again. It's the same people singing the same stuff, but it got me my first look at like scalability.
I was gonna say, what did it teach you that you use today? But it's super clear. This is the path to high growth SaaS CMO.
Like, hey, put out a video every year. We're guaranteed X amount of revenue. I'm like, all right, recurring revenue. Bill Gaither, the early ARR guy.
You invented SaaS.
Yeah,
you invented SaaS. It sounds like
he's just really good at writing gospel music. So that was my first show.
I love it. What's your final meal if you have to pick?
My final meal? Oh man, filet.
How are you cooking it?
Ooh, probably in a cast iron in an oven.
I just assume medium or medium rare.
Oh, medium rare.
Okay, totally fair.
And then my final question for you: who is somebody who inspires you personally, professionally, or both?
Oh man, somebody that inspires me. Yeah, someone that I have been lucky to get to know since the pandemic. Every Thursday night there's a call, there's a Zoom call called Thursday Night Sales, and it's like 150 people get on every Thursday night.
I used to go all the time. Is it still wild? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The beginning of the pandemic. Yeah, that was like something I found. I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
thing?
So Scott Leese and Amy Volas are both two individuals that I look up to personally, and I think have really made an impact in a small community of people. And I have a lot of respect for somebody that can be that consistent. And shout out to Justin Welsh, who was on there originally, but Scott and Amy have been on it. We, almost
I didn't know Justin was on at the beginning.
Justin was it was originally Justin and Scott and Amy. Or maybe, actually, you know what? I have no idea. They're going to hate me for getting that wrong. Like, but Scott,
Whatever. I'm not cleaning it up unless they want to sponsor it. No one gets anything unless they're sponsored.
Here's why I have respect for them. There are individuals who have put in really hard work at the beginning of their careers and now have lucrative consulting companies and gigs, but they have never changed their attitudes or minced words. Like, they tell you what they think all the time. And I have a lot of respect for people that do that. So shout out to Scott and Amy. Small shout out to Justin, because I think he's similar. But
I totally agree. I think the last one I attended, if I remember correctly, Gaetano DiNardo, I think is his name, was like playing guitar.
Yeah.
Like...
So I've been almost every Thursday since it began. We're going on 3 years, I think.
I attended pretty consistently. I want to say 2020 or beginning of 2021, or probably 2020 then, because it was like a COVID.
It was a COVID thing, and it's been just a good community of people.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining, Kyle. This was awesome.
Yeah,
I can't wait to hear how many people hit you up referencing not just the podcast. You better put something super specific.
Good luck. And
it's like the Hunger Games.
Yeah, another thing real fast. If you send me a note and you don't hear from me, send me another note. Please.
Oh God.
It's
Kyle, what are you doing to yourself?
But it's like, my LinkedIn inbox is a mess. My inbox is a mess. Like, don't get offended if I don't respond initially.
Okay.
But if you do a crappy job with outreach, I'm never going to respond.
Totally fair. Thank you very much for joining. And I look forward to talking to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for checking out this episode of You Should Talk To. This show is brought to you by the company with the same name, You Should Talk To, a company that helps marketing leaders find the right agency or freelancer for their situation. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow You Should Talk To wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit YouShouldTalkTo.com for more information.